Welcome to the Tired Historian channel. Here, we delve into the past so you can fall asleep easily and with purpose. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button right away. By the end of this lecture, you'll be sound asleep. Close your eyes. The story is about to begin. Tonight, we'll explore one of the most complex and tense conflicts of our time: the confrontation between Israel and Iran. The relationship between these two countries has undergone a dramatic transformation, from close partnership to deep, almost irreconcilable hostility. Not so long ago, Israel and Iran were allies, with no major disagreements, and it seemed there was no reason for conflict. But then, everything changed. The turning point was the revolution in Iran, which completely reshaped the country's politics and its approach to former allies. Two nations that once shared common goals and strategic interests in the Middle East suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a growing divide. What followed was a true regional Cold War, full of covert operations, mutual accusations, and open threats. Since then, relations between Israel and Iran have remained extremely strained. Both countries now actively compete in matters of security and military influence, frequently teetering on the edge of direct confrontation. Their conflict has expanded beyond their borders, drawing in other countries and making the Middle East even more unstable and unpredictable. But how did this friendship turn into a bitter conflict? What events and decisions led to such a serious confrontation? And why did it eventually lead to military clashes? To understand this, we must carefully trace the entire path, from early friendship to today's animosity. The history of Israel-Iran relations began in a way few would expect today. For nearly 30 years after the founding of Israel in 1948, the two countries were strategic partners. Their cooperation spanned diplomacy, economics, military operations, and intelligence. To understand how this unusual alliance formed, we need to take a closer look at the circumstances surrounding the creation of Israel and the emergence of modern Iranian monarchy. After World War II, the question of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine, then under British mandate, became urgent. The tragedy of the Holocaust made the creation of a Jewish homeland a moral necessity. Global Jewish communities exerted political pressure, while major powers, notably the USSR and the USA, offered support. As a result, in November 1947, the United Nations adopted a resolution to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Arab nations strongly rejected this decision and instead prepared for war, hoping to destroy the nascent state of Israel. On May 14, 1948, the day beginning the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, also known as Israel's War of Independence. Although the Israeli army was smaller and less equipped, the country successfully defended its independence through strong leadership, citizen mobilization, and determined counterattacks. Israel not only survived, but expanded its territory. The reason the Arab-Palestinian state was never formed lies in the Arab countries' decision to reject partition and attempt Israel's destruction. Their defeat cost them the opportunity to establish a state, and the proposed Arab territories were instead partially occupied by Israel and other countries. Jordan seized the West Bank, and Egypt took the Gaza Strip. At the same time, Iran was ruled by the Pahlavi dynasty under Shah Mohammad Reza, who came to power in 1941 after his father was forced to abdicate during the Allied invasion of Iran in World War II. The young Shah aimed to modernize Iran and turn it into a regional power aligned with Western values, and friendly with America and Europe. He viewed Arab nationalism as a major threat to his rule, and Iran's territorial integrity, especially given the country's ethnic diversity. Under the Shah, Iran underwent rapid modernization, known as the White Revolution, beginning in the early 1960s. He implemented land reforms, expanded education and healthcare, gave women the right to vote, and heavily invested in industrialization, fueled by oil revenues. However, he also maintained an authoritarian regime, brutally repressing dissent through the notorious Savak secret police. Iran was one of the first Muslim countries to de facto recognize Israel's existence as early as 1950, though it never did so officially. This was due to the Shah's government fearing backlash from Islamic clerics and public opinion, and wanting to maintain relations with Arab nations. Still, by the 1960s, Israel had an embassy in Tehran that operated as a full diplomatic mission. Their shared enemy, Arab nationalism, especially in the form of Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser, brought Iran and Israel closer. Nasser promoted pan-Arab unity against Israel and Western influence. Iran, fearing the spread of Arab nationalism, supported Israel diplomatically and economically, while maintaining an official stance of neutrality. This bond deepened after the Six-Day War in 1967, in which Israel launched a preemptive strike that destroyed much of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground, then quickly defeated the combined forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Despite the Arab oil embargo that followed, Iran continued supplying Israel with oil, which was critical for Israel's energy needs. The next major war, the Yom Kippur War of 1973, saw Egypt and Syria launch a surprise attack on Israel during the Jewish holiday. Israel struggled in the early days, but with the determination of its forces and crucial Western support, including from Iran, it managed to turn the tide. Iranian oil again proved vital during the embargo. In addition to economic cooperation, Israel and Iran worked closely in military and intelligence matters. Israeli officers trained Shah's troops, and Israeli weapons and technology were used by Iranian forces. Mossad and Savak exchanged intelligence on Arab nationalist movements in the region. A secret project, Project Flower, saw Israel help Iran develop anti-ship missile technology in exchange for oil and financial support. Economic ties were also strong. Israeli companies helped build infrastructure in Iran, roads, irrigation systems, and agricultural modernization, while Iran provided oil to Israel on favorable terms. By the late 1970s, however, the Shah's regime faced deep internal problems. Despite economic growth, reforms, and widespread suppression of free speech and dissent fueled anger. Iran's elite fractured. On one side, aristocrats, landowners, military officers, and bureaucrats loyal to the Shah. On the other, the clergy and middle and lower classes, who suffered under the regime's heavy-handed policies. In his final years, the Shah became increasingly disengaged from governance, indulging in luxury and grand celebrations. The most infamous symbol of this detachment was the 2,500-year celebration of the Persian monarchy in October 1971, held in the ancient city of Persepolis. The lavish event, attended by global dignitaries, cost tens of millions of dollars and featured imported delicacies, luxury tents, and opulent furnishings, while much of Iran's population lived in poverty. The celebration provoked outrage and deepened the rift between the Shah and his people. His pro-Western stance, especially his alliance with the U.S. and Israel, further alienated the conservative clergy, who condemned the Shah's secularism, Western lifestyle, and foreign dependency. Anti-American and anti-Zionist sentiments among the Iranian population grew stronger, turning into a powerful political weapon for the opposition. The central figure of the revolution was Ruhollah Khomeini, an influential Shiite cleric who had been forced to leave Iran in 1963 due to his open opposition to the Shah's regime. Khomeini held the title of Ayatollah, which in Shiite Islam means sign of God, a title reserved for the most respected religious leaders with deep knowledge of Islamic law and theology. Because of this title, Khomeini held immense influence among Iranian believers. From exile, Khomeini spread his ideas, calling for a return to traditional Islamic values and rejection of Western influence. He fiercely criticized Israel and the United States, accusing them of colonizing and corrupting the Muslim world. By the mid-1970s, his speeches, distributed via audio tapes and underground publications, reached millions. His popularity surged, especially among youth, students, and the poor, who had become disillusioned with the Shah's promises and Western-style modernization. The revolution began in January 1978, with mass protests in the city of Qom, which quickly spread to Tehran and other major cities. Demonstrations grew larger and more violent with each passing month. The Shah attempted to suppress the protests with force, but the military and police could no longer maintain control, and many soldiers began to side with the protesters. By the end of 1978, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had lost almost all power and was forced to flee the country into exile. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran and was welcomed by millions as a hero and the savior of the nation. He swiftly took control of the revolution and initiated radical changes. He declared the establishment of an Islamic republic based on Sharia law and made anti-Americanism and anti-Zionism the official ideology of the new regime. To Khomeini, Israel was not just an enemy, but the ultimate symbol of Western imperialism, colonialism, and oppression of Muslims. The new regime shut down the Israeli embassy in Tehran and severed all diplomatic ties, declaring Israel its primary adversary. Soon after, on November 4, 1979, tensions between Iran and the United States reached a boiling point when a group of radical Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats and staff hostage, declaring the embassy a den of spies. This hostage crisis lasted 444 days, causing a severe rupture in Iran's relations with the U.S. and other Western nations. In response, the United States and its allies imposed wide-ranging economic and political sanctions on Iran. These sanctions severely restricted Iran's international trade and access to financial markets, significantly damaging the country's economy and contributing to its growing isolation on the world stage. At the same time, 6 American diplomats managed to escape the embassy takeover and found refuge in the Canadian ambassador's residence in Tehran. Their situation was extremely dangerous. If discovered by Iranian authorities or radical groups, they likely would have been arrested and accused of espionage, facing long imprisonment or even execution. The growing anti-American hysteria in the country made their circumstances even more precarious. To rescue them, the CIA launched a secret operation known as Argo. American agents posed as Canadian filmmakers, scouting locations for a science fiction movie. Using fake passports and a fabricated script, the agents successfully smuggled the 6 diplomats out of Tehran. This mission became one of the CIA's most famous operations and was later dramatized in the Oscar-winning film Argo. The remaining hostages were eventually released after long and complex negotiations. Israeli leaders watched with alarm as Iran's regime became more radicalized, recognizing that a powerful and ideologically driven enemy had emerged in the region, one whose primary goal was the destruction of the State of Israel. Thus, the Islamic Revolution in Iran permanently changed the political landscape of the Middle East and completely transformed the Israel-Iran relationship, turning former allies into bitter, irreconcilable enemies. After 1979, the relationship between Israel and revolutionary Iran appeared irreparably broken. The new Iranian leadership made hostility toward Israel a cornerstone of its ideology, officially declaring it the regime's primary foe. After such a dramatic turn of events, any cooperation between Iran and Israel became impossible. However, not long after, one of the most brutal conflicts in the Middle East erupted, the Iran-Iraq War, which paradoxically brought the two enemies closer together, albeit temporarily. The war began on September 22, 1980, when Iraqi forces under Saddam Hussein invaded Iranian territory. There were several reasons for the conflict. On one hand, Hussein hoped to exploit the chaos and political instability in post-revolutionary Iran, aiming for a swift capture of the oil-rich Khuzestan province, largely populated by Arabs. On the other hand, he feared the spread of the Islamic Revolution to neighboring Arab states, including his own country, Iraq, where a Shiite majority posed a potential threat to his Sunni-dominated regime. Thus, the invasion was seen by Saddam as a preemptive strike to protect his rule. At first, Iraq made significant advances, quickly pushing into Iranian territory. However, within a few months, it became clear that there would be no easy victory. The Iranians fiercely resisted, mobilizing a massive number of volunteers, including youths and teenagers, and gradually began pushing Iraqi forces back, launching counteroffensives of their own. Amid the bloody battles and heavy losses on both sides, Israel found itself in a complex and unexpected position. On the one hand, revolutionary Iran remained a staunch enemy, openly declaring its intention to destroy the Jewish state. On the other hand, Saddam Hussein's regime was also seen as a serious threat. Iraq had a powerful army, was heavily armed with Soviet weapons, and received funding from many Arab countries hostile to Israel. This paradox led Israel to secretly support Iran. The main goal of this policy was to weaken both adversaries. Israel benefited from a prolonged, exhausting war between two powerful enemies, keeping them locked in conflict and unable to focus their strength elsewhere. The longer the war dragged on, the weaker both regimes became, reducing the threat they posed to Israel. To this end, Israel began secretly supplying weapons to Iran through complex schemes and intermediaries. The most famous example of such efforts was the secret operation known as Iran-Contra, which was organized jointly by American and Israeli intelligence agencies. This operation involved arms shipments to Iran, despite an official U.S. embargo. In return, Iranian leadership promised to help secure the release of American hostages held in Lebanon by the pro-Iranian group Hezbollah, which was backed by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Under the deal, Israel supplied Iran with American-made anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles, aircraft parts, artillery shells, and other munitions. The weapons were delivered via intermediaries in third countries, such as Switzerland and Portugal, often with Israel's direct involvement. Despite Iran's public anti-Israel rhetoric, its leadership readily accepted the assistance, as the country, isolated by international sanctions, desperately needed modern arms and ammunition. This covert cooperation eventually led to a major scandal. In 1986, details of the Iran-Contra affair were leaked to the global press, triggering a political crisis in the United States. The Reagan administration came under heavy fire for secretly selling arms to a radical Islamic regime, which damaged the president's reputation. The international community strongly condemned the operation. Many Western countries stated that such actions undermined efforts to end the war. Some European and Latin American nations even tightened sanctions against Iran, further limiting its access to global arms markets. Nevertheless, for Israel, the strategic benefits were clear. The war, which lasted 8 years, caused massive damage to the economies and militaries of both Iran. Third, by using Hezbollah, Iran could strike at Israel without direct military confrontation, maintaining plausible deniability regarding specific attacks and armed operations. By the 1990s, Hezbollah had grown into a formidable military force that regularly launched attacks on Israeli troops in southern Lebanon. The clashes were intense and drew Israel into a prolonged and exhausting conflict. Hezbollah's main tactics included mortar and rocket attacks, sabotage operations against border outposts, and ambushes on patrols. Additionally, Hezbollah frequently resorted to kidnapping Israeli soldiers, which caused major public outcry and complicated Israel's position on the international stage. These continuous hostilities persisted until May 2000, when Israel, realizing the inefficiency and extremely high cost of maintaining its presence in southern Lebanon, decided to withdraw its troops completely. However, the clashes did not stop entirely. Hezbollah continued to launch periodic attacks on Israel's border territories, to which Israel responded with targeted operations and airstrikes. But the conflict extended far beyond the Middle East. On March 17, 1992, terrorists detonated a powerful bomb outside the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The explosion killed 29 people and injured more than 200 others. 2 years later, another major terrorist attack struck the Argentine capital, this time targeting a Jewish cultural center. That bombing claimed 85 lives and left more than 300 injured. Investigations by Argentine and international intelligence services, including those from Israel and the United States, clearly pointed to Iran and Hezbollah's involvement. According to the investigation, the attacks were carried out by Hezbollah operatives, with Iranian intelligence officials and members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps serving as organizers and sponsors. The Argentine authorities issued international arrest warrants for several senior Iranian officials, accusing them of orchestrating the terrorist acts. Tehran categorically denied all accusations, officially stating that there was no evidence and calling the claims politically motivated attempts to discredit Iran on the world stage. Iranian authorities never admitted to any involvement in the attacks and rejected all allegations of supporting international terrorism. Nevertheless, these events significantly damaged Iran's international reputation, portraying it as a state that actively supported terrorist groups and used terrorism to achieve political goals. Despite Tehran's categorical denials, international condemnation and sanctions against Iran intensified significantly. Iran's expanding influence in the region wasn't limited to Lebanon and its cooperation with Hezbollah. As early as the 1990s, Tehran began supporting another radical group opposing Israel, the Palestinian Hamas movement. The basis for this cooperation was a shared interest in disrupting the peace negotiations initiated by the international community in the early 1990s. In October 1991, a major international conference was held in Madrid, where Israel, for the first time, sat down for talks with Arab countries and Palestinian representatives. The primary issue was finding a resolution to the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The main Palestinian representative in these talks was the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, led by Yasser Arafat. The PLO, which had been based in Tunisia for some time, aimed to establish a Palestinian state alongside Israel. However, the radical Palestinian group Hamas, founded in the Gaza Strip in 1987, strongly opposed any peace negotiations. Hamas viewed such talks as a betrayal and demanded the complete destruction of Israel. Due to these extremist views, serious tensions and rivalry emerged between Hamas and the PLO, both vying for the support of the Palestinian population. After the Madrid conference, peace talks continued, leading to the signing of the famous Oslo Accords in 1993 between Israel and the PLO. These agreements envisioned a phased transfer of control over Gaza and parts of the West Bank to the Palestinians, eventually establishing an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. But the process was fraught with difficulties. Palestinians were dissatisfied with the slow pace of territorial handovers, while Israel accused the Palestinians of failing to adequately combat terrorism. Hamas outright rejected the Oslo Accords and resolved to disrupt the peace process. However, after Israel's departure, a violent internal power struggle broke out in Gaza between the Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas. Fatah, a moderate movement within the Palestine Liberation Organization, supported negotiations and peaceful coexistence with Israel. Hamas, in contrast, maintained a radical position, advocating for armed struggle and the destruction of Israel. As a result of this bloody conflict, by 2007, Hamas had completely seized power in the Gaza Strip, ousting Fatah supporters. This led to a sharp escalation in violence. Rocket attacks by militants intensified significantly. Israel's first major military response was Operation Cast Lead in December 2008. The campaign involved intense airstrikes on Gaza, followed by a ground invasion, aiming to cripple Hamas's rocket-launching capabilities. Hamas resisted fiercely, employing weapons and tactics learned from foreign instructors. The fighting lasted for over 3 weeks and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. However, the threat to Israel was not completely eliminated. In the aftermath, Israel began implementing new measures to protect its citizens from rocket fire. One of the most important was the Iron Dome missile defense system, first deployed in 2011. This system successfully intercepted the majority of incoming rockets, significantly reducing civilian casualties and improving Israel's defensive posture. In November 2012, another round of conflict broke out, known as Operation Pillar of Defense. It began with a series of Israeli airstrikes following renewed rocket attacks from Gaza. For the first time, Hamas launched long-range rockets capable of reaching major Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv. The fighting lasted 8 days and ended with a ceasefire brokered by Egypt. The most extensive operation occurred in the summer of 2014, Operation Protective Edge. This time, the conflict lasted for 50 days. Hamas made extensive use of a network of underground tunnels, allowing militants to move undetected and launch surprise attacks on Israeli forces. In response, Israel began building a vast underground barrier along the Gaza border, equipped with sensors and fortifications to prevent future infiltration. During these conflicts, Hamas also frequently used the tactic of kidnapping Israeli soldiers and civilians to later exchange them for Palestinian prisoners. The most well-known example occurred in 2011 when Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, captured in 2006, was exchanged for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. In May 2021, another major escalation erupted known as Operation Guardian of the Walls. Over the course of 11 days, Hamas and other groups launched more than 4,000 rockets at Israel. Israel responded with massive airstrikes, destroying Hamas infrastructure and other military targets. Once again, the Iron Dome proved highly effective, intercepting the majority of incoming rockets and saving countless civilian lives. The most recent and devastating confrontation began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a large-scale surprise attack on Israel. Militants infiltrated Israeli territory en masse, killing civilians and carrying out brutal massacres in border towns. In response, Israel launched a massive military campaign in Gaza, resulting in widespread destruction and a significant death toll. This tragic conflict continues to this day. Another major source of regional tension emerged with the Syrian civil war, which began in 2011 and quickly escalated into a large-scale regional conflict. The war started with mass protests by Syrian citizens against the dictatorial regime of President Bashar al-Assad, who responded with violent repression. This led to an armed uprising against the Syrian government. Opposition to Assad came from both moderate groups and radical Islamist organizations, including ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra. The conflict soon evolved into a complex and bloody war with numerous competing factions and the involvement of foreign powers, including Russia, the United States, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel. For Iran, Syria had long been a strategic ally. The Assad regime, first under Bashar and previously under his father Hafez, provided Iran with a crucial land corridor for supplying weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon. This gave Tehran a unique opportunity to strengthen its influence near Israel's borders. When the civil war began, Iran quickly came to Assad's aid. Tehran sent thousands of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) fighters and coordinated the deployment of Shiite militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan to support the Syrian regime. Iran also built dozens of military bases and weapons depots across Syria, solidifying its presence and influence in the region. Alarming developments was a series of Houthi attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. They hijacked ships like the Galaxy Leader and held their crews hostage, raising serious international concern. In response, the U.S., UK, and several other countries launched naval operations to protect global shipping routes, increase their presence in the region, and attempted to curtail Houthi capabilities. Israel views the threat from the Houthis as extremely serious. Despite Yemen's geographic distance, Israel sees a direct risk to its national security due to the Houthis' strong ties with Iran and their shared ideological goals. Israeli military and intelligence officials have long warned that weapons supplied to the Houthis be used against Israel as well. These fears were confirmed in recent years when the Houthis repeatedly attempted to strike Israeli targets and cities using drones and long-range missiles. Such incidents became increasingly frequent. In April 2025, the Houthis launched a missile strike on Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, damaging infrastructure and temporarily halting air traffic. While Israel had previously carried out covert and unofficial airstrikes in Yemen, in response to this latest attack, it openly acknowledged its involvement and launched a series of massive air raids on Houthi targets, including the port of Hodeidah and Sana'a Airport. Then in June 2025, for the first time, Israel deployed its naval forces in a direct strike on the port, an unprecedented move in this conflict. Thus, the war in Yemen became yet another front in the extended confrontation between Israel and Iran, expanding the scope of their struggle and introducing new threats to Israel's national security. Yemen has now turned into another hotspot on the map of the Middle East, directly affecting Israel's security and threatening global maritime stability in the region. But the Iran-Israel conflict was not limited to rocket fire and airstrikes. It also played out more covertly through the use of cyber attacks and sophisticated intelligence operations. In recent years, this aspect of the conflict has taken on particular importance, becoming a key element in the two states' struggle for regional dominance. One of the first and most well-known examples was the cyber attack involving the Stuxnet computer virus. First discovered in June 2010, the virus infiltrated uranium enrichment centrifuges at a secret nuclear facility in Iran. Stuxnet was so complex and advanced that it physically damaged. Another powerful piece of cyber weaponry used against Iran was the Flame virus, uncovered in 2012. Even more sophisticated than Stuxnet, Flame was designed for long-term covert espionage. It secretly collected classified data, recorded conversations using built-in microphones, intercepted emails and documents, took screenshots of computer screens, and transmitted all of this information to remote servers controlled by intelligence agencies. Cybersecurity experts concluded that Flame had also been developed by Israeli and American intelligence as a means of persistent surveillance of Iran and its military projects. In addition to cyber warfare, Israel also carried out daring and high-stakes intelligence operations on Iranian soil. One of the most notable was an operation by Mossad agents in January 2018. Israeli operatives infiltrated a warehouse in Tehran's industrial zone, which housed a secret archive of Iran's nuclear program. In a carefully executed and highly complex operation, they extracted over 50,000 documents and more than 160 compact disks containing detailed data on Iran's nuclear research. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly revealed the results of this operation at a special press conference, presenting some of the stolen documents to journalists and the international community. He declared that the documents provided undeniable proof that Iran had been hiding its true intentions of developing nuclear weapons for many years. This revelation sparked a strong international reaction. The United States, Israel, and several Western countries used the documents to justify increasing sanctions and diplomatic pressure on Tehran. Iran reacted sharply and negatively. Iranian officials labeled the Mossad operation a propaganda stunt and an act of espionage, accusing Israel of violating international law and Iranian sovereignty. Tehran also claimed that the presented documents had been distorted and taken out of context, portraying the entire operation as an attempt to manipulate global public opinion. Another highly controversial aspect of Israeli operations was the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists, key figures in the country's nuclear program. Although Israel never officially claimed responsibility for these killings, both Western intelligence agencies and Iranian officials consistently accused Mossad of orchestrating them, noting the precision and professionalism of the executions. The killings drew condemnation not only from Iran, but also from various international organizations and human rights groups, who viewed such actions as illegal and in violation of international norms. Iran, for its part, responded by developing its own cyber units and launching retaliatory attacks against Israeli targets. Iranian hacker groups became known for their attempts to infiltrate critical Israeli.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, quickly launched an investigation demanding explanations and immediate access to the secret sites. The first inspections, which began in 2003, confirmed many of the fears held by Western nations. Iran was indeed engaged in research and development that could be used for military purposes. The international response was firm and uncompromising. In 2006, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted its first resolution, imposing sanctions on Iran. The resolution demanded the immediate suspension of uranium enrichment and the shutdown of any projects that could lead to the creation of nuclear weapons. When Iran ignored these demands, the sanctions intensified year after year. These sanctions affected nearly all sectors of Iranian society: the banking system, the oil industry, arms trade, and even imposed restrictions on the movement and assets of senior Iranian officials. The United States was especially active in pushing for sanctions and diplomatic isolation, while Israel declared that Iran's nuclear program was an existential threat to the Jewish state and warned it would take any measures necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Both President George W. Bush and later President Barack Obama adopted hardline positions, with U.S. officials stating that Iran, acquiring nuclear weapons, could trigger a new arms race and destabilize the entire Middle East. From that point on, Iran's nuclear program became a central issue in global diplomacy and security. From the early 2000s to 2015, the years were marked by tense negotiations, threats of military action, and ever-expanding sanctions, which led to a deep economic and political crisis within Iran. By the mid-2000s, the situation surrounding Iran's nuclear ambitions had become almost hopeless. Iran persisted in developing its nuclear technology despite the growing pressure, and the threat of war loomed ever larger. The international community searched for a path out of the crisis. Finally, after nearly 2 years of intense negotiations, a truly historic agreement was reached on July 14, 2015. In Vienna, Austria, Iran and 6 major world powers, the US, Russia, China, the UK, France, and Germany, signed a deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. This carefully crafted and complex agreement was meant to diffuse international tensions and prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Under the agreement, Iran was required to reduce the number of operating centrifuges from 19,000 to around 6,000. It was forbidden from enriching uranium beyond 3.67%, far below weapons grade. Iran had to dispose of 98% of its enriched uranium stockpile, shipping it out of the country. The heavy water reactor in Arak had to be redesigned so it could not produce plutonium suitable for weapons. Iran agreed to unprecedented and strict monitoring by the IAEA, including round-the-clock access. Serious concerns were also voiced by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and other Gulf Arab states, who viewed Iran as their main regional rival.
These countries believed that once sanctions were lifted, Iran would not only gain economic relief, but also additional resources to expand its military and political presence in the Middle East. Despite high hopes, the agreement did not eliminate deep-rooted mistrust between Iran and the West. And in May 2018, the situation changed dramatically once again. It does not prevent Iranian missile development. In addition, Trump criticized the limited duration of the agreement, arguing that it merely postpones the problem. The decision to withdraw the United States was made shortly after Israel presented the world with a vast archive of secret documents secretly smuggled out of Tehran by the Mossad intelligence service, as we mentioned earlier. These documents proved that Iran actively developed nuclear weapons until 2003 and continued to keep documentation, technical data, and plans even after formally abandoning the military component of its program. Although the archive contained no evidence that Iran continued active military development after the agreement was signed, it confirmed past suspicions and intensified distrust of Iran's intentions. The IAEA stated that the documents only confirmed previous suspicions and called for further thorough inspections. The U.S. withdrawal from the deal resulted in the immediate reinstatement of harsh sanctions, which the Trump administration called a policy of maximum pressure. The newly reimposed restrictions nearly paralyzed the Iranian economy. Banking operations were blocked, oil exports were sharply limited, and many international companies left the country due to fear of American sanctions. The Iranian economy faced a serious crisis, worsened not only by external sanctions, but also by internal problems such as corruption, economic inefficiency, and poor management. This triggered a powerful wave of popular protests and social unrest inside the country. At the same time, European countries, Russia and China, expressed deep disappointment with Trump's decision, insisting on preserving the agreement and calling on Iran to comply with its terms. Despite the U.S. withdrawal, Europeans even attempted to support Iran by creating a special financial mechanism, INSTEX, designed to bypass American sanctions and continue trade with Iran. However, in practice, this mechanism proved almost useless due to European companies' fears of falling under U.S. sanction. On March 7, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump sent a personal letter to Iran's supreme leader. In the letter, Trump proposed immediately starting new nuclear negotiations, but with extremely tough conditions. Specifically, the U.S. demanded a complete and irreversible dismantling of Iran's entire nuclear program and an immediate cessation of any uranium enrichment. Furthermore, Iran had to completely stop supporting all its regional proxy groups within 2 months. If Iran agreed, the U.S. promised to lift all economic sanctions, normalize relations with Iran, and release frozen assets and Iranian oil exports. A 60-day ultimatum was set. In April and May 2025, a new round of negotiations took place in closed sessions via intermediaries with the parties in separate rooms, highlighting the extremely tense situation. Iran proposed a compromise 3-stage plan. It would temporarily reduce uranium enrichment levels to those specified in the 2015 agreement, under strict IAEA supervision. In exchange, Iran demanded partial sanctions relief. The second stage involved a complete halt to enrichment above the agreed level and adoption of an additional IAEA protocol significantly expanding inspectors' rights. In return, the U.S. was to unblock Iranian assets and allow free oil exports. The third stage would see Iran transferring its already accumulated highly enriched uranium to a third country, fully addressing international concerns. However, Donald Trump took an extremely hard line, categorically stating he would not accept any uranium enrichment in Iran at all, considering this point a key condition for any new deal. As a result, the negotiations became significantly more complicated and nearly stalled. Nevertheless, both sides still left the door open for dialogue. But a decisive blow came with an Israeli attack. After this incident, the planned next round of negotiations was canceled. When the ultimatum expired without any agreement, Israel acted immediately. Israeli Operation People Like a Lion. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched an unprecedented large-scale military operation codenamed People Like a Lion.
On the first day, Israeli forces carried out airstrikes and drone attacks on more than 100 military and strategic Iranian targets, including nuclear centers at Natanz, military bases, and key infrastructure and military points in the capital, Tehran. That same day, a series of bold assassinations of high-ranking Iranian officials and scientists took place. Among the killed were senior members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and leading Iranian nuclear experts. Iran's retaliatory strike. The very next day after the Israeli strikes, Iran launched a massive counterattack. More than 150 ballistic missiles and about 100 combat drones were launched at major cities in Israel. As a result, both military and civilian targets were hit. Israel's air defense system managed to intercept a significant number of rockets and drones, but completely preventing casualties and destruction proved impossible. International reaction to the conflict. The European Union, Russia, China, and the United Nations called on both sides to immediately cease hostilities and return to diplomatic negotiations, warning of the serious risk of the conflict escalating into a full-scale war with potentially global consequences. Donald Trump himself addressed Tehran again, emphasizing that the conflict could end quickly if Iran immediately accepted the conditions proposed by the U.S. and returned to the negotiating table. Trump stated that diplomatic doors remain open despite ongoing fighting. What the outcome of this conflict will be, we will find out soon. For now, we can only hope for a swift and peaceful resolution. Thank you for watching. If you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave comments. Ma.